I'm at the point where I want to create all of the CSS that will style my main navigation bar to be across the top of the page and to be horizontal with equally spaced buttons, hopefully, and to be right around this tall. It's about 40 pixels probably. So I'm going to start out by working on this top navigation bar, and a lot of the footer navigation bar will get handled at the same time. And we'll start to see some changes in that HTML code. Okay. So one thing I want to remind you is that we are creating a first draft of a portfolio website. And what I want you to do is not feel like these changes are permanent. So what we need to do right now is get a good solution now, and then we can fine tune it as we go. So please don't put a lot of pressure on yourself to come up with something that is beautiful right now. Let's just focus on something that is functional. And then as you start to build that skill set, you can come back and make changes. One of the nice things about working on the website of things is that the changes are generally free, right? We don't have to do a reprint. We just come in and change some code. So try to let yourself off the hook about creating anything that is a thing of beauty for now, and just worry about something that is properly laid out and that is functional. And then you can always come back and make changes as you learn more about the language. So the first thing we're going to do is start working on that main navigation bar. And so as we go, we want to make sure that we're writing these styles in the right sections that we've chosen here with these headings. So we're most likely going to be working right here. And for now, we're going to try our best not to add anything new to the HTML. So we really want to try to call out things in the right order. And what we want to do as a general rule is if we can style things by calling out just the tag, which is called a type selector, and you'll hear a lot of people call it a tag level selector. We want to use that instead of getting any more specific. So CSS is all about how specific you are. And we only want to be as specific as we need to be, but we do want to be as specific as we need to be. So it's a delicate balance. We'll talk about that as we go, but I know in your crash course you learned about some of the different types of selectors, which were the type selector as well as the class selector. We will be writing some class selectors as well because we wrote some classes. In our code here, we gave our one of our navigation bar buttons a class, and we gave all of our footer navigation links classes so that we can style those differently. And one thing we don't have here are ID selectors. We did learn in the crash course that we need to be sparing with ID selectors because we can only use that ID once per page. So we really only want to use those as much as necessary, and we try to want to use them as little as possible. So let's start by writing some type selectors and some class selectors as necessary to be able to style this. And let's try very hard not to touch the HTML of the page. The only thing that we're going to need to add is a link to that wireframe. And we can do that at any time. So the first thing that we want to do is take a look at our website here. Let me see if I can get it back. One of the first things we want to do is get rid of the bullets next to these so that they don't have any bullets next to them. Then we're going to actually want to try to take these from being vertically stacked to being horizontal across the page and evenly distributed across the page. And we're going to want to get rid of the underlines under each of these links. That's a default style. We want to get rid of them here, but we actually do want to keep them in our main content. So anytime a link shows up in a paragraph or a call to action, we want to make sure that it's underlined so that people know it's a link and they know they can click on it within the text. But usually within a navigation bar, we're going to have some other stylistic considerations that let people know that they can interact with this. And so getting rid of the underline just for the navigation bar is going to be kind of important. So let's go ahead and take care of some of that by first getting rid of the bullet points there. So I'm going to come over here, and in my header and footer navigation, I actually want to get rid of these in both of those. And so what I'm going to do is I'm going to select the nav element, and I'm going to select list items within the nav element. That way I'll be able to remove the bullets from both of the navigation without removing the bullets from lists that are actually in the text. Because if we have a bullet list in the text, we probably want the bullets to be there. So I'm going to choose nav, and then I'm going to choose UL and LI. This is called a compound selector. What this is saying is to choose list items within an unordered list within a nav element. So these are basically calling out the nesting of these items. And I'm going to open up some curly braces. And I actually think I might be doing this wrong. I think it might need to be just the UL, but we'll try it. So I know that the property is going to be list style type. And when I start typing for list style type, this is where I could change whether I wanted them to be circle or square or disc. I have all kinds of choices, but I'm going to choose none. And what that means is I don't want any bullets there. Now I'm going to check it real quick by saving and refreshing my page. And if my bullets don't go away, okay, they did. Notice my bullets went away in my navigation bar up top, in my navigation bar down below, but they're still here in my unordered list within my text, which is important. I really want to keep my list looking like lists in any of my written text. I just want to style my navigation bar right now. So I need to be specific enough to grab preferably both navigation bars instead of one at a time. You know, if I can style them both at the same time, that's good. But I want to make sure that I'm not so general that I end up making these changes to every single bullet list that's available, because I want to make sure to keep some intact. So this is where I'm talking about it being a balance on how specific we are. We don't want to be so specific that we're styling this one separate from this one if we don't need to, but we don't want to be so general that we style all of them to be the same way. Okay, so now we've gotten rid of our bullets. The next thing is to get them going horizontally across the page. To get these to lay out across the page as a horizontal menu, we're going to use a couple of different styles, and we're going to start with a newer concept which ties into that border box property that we were talking about before. And that has to do with a improvement to CSS known as Flexbox. And Flexbox is a layout model that allows for us to have some different options than we used to have. Again, I'm not going to get too into the nitty-gritty of it, but I do recommend that you consider taking a short tutorial or completing a short tutorial on Flexbox, because there's a lot that you can do with it, and understanding how it works can be really helpful. At this phase in our understanding of CSS, I feel like trying to explain it might be a little bit overwhelming though, so what I'm going to do is just show you one way that we can use it. Now, I'm also going to switch from writing my code in Sublime Text right now to writing it in the browser instead. This is something called designing in browser, and most web designers do this because we do better if we see that visual feedback as we're going, and having to switch back and forth between Sublime Text and the browser to see the results is just a little bit unnecessary if we can use the browser to do it instead. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to start working within the browser's developer tools. All web browsers have developer tools, and they are for just this purpose, for, you know, doing some work in the browser and troubleshooting different areas of it. So web developers use this as well, and designers use this a lot. So what I'm going to do is use Google Chrome. All browsers have developer tools, by the way. And it's just a matter of which ones make the most sense for you. So if you have some experience with web design or development and you already have a browser where you prefer the developer tools, that's fine. But if you're just learning this, I recommend that even if you're using a different browser, that you switch to Google Chrome so that you can work along with me. And then you can check out the other browsers' developer tools as you get more comfortable. In order to use the developer tools in Google Chrome, I just need to right-click somewhere in the white space of the page and choose Inspect. That's going to open up this whole extra area that tells me more about the browser and what's going on in the page. Now, mine opens up on the side. If yours does not and you need for it to, you can change where this panel appears in the browser as relative to the content on the page by choosing where you want to dock it. So you can have it as a separate window altogether, or you can dock it to the left, the right, or to the bottom. Since I'm working on the navigation bar, it might make sense for me to dock it to the bottom, but for now I'm going to leave it off to the side because I want to see a little bit more of this as I'm explaining it to you. So what I can see here are several different tabs across the top, and there's also something going on here and something going on down at the bottom. So this can look really overwhelming when you first learn how to use it. What I recommend you do is just follow along with me and use the pieces that we need to use. And again, more of this will become clear to you as we go, but there are a lot of different ways to approach using this. So I'm going to walk you through a couple of them very quickly. What we see at the top here is the Elements tab, and that shows us essentially the HTML. This is not HTML. This is actually something called the Document Object Model, or the DOM, D-O-M for short. But for all intents and purposes, as we're learning, this is basically our HTML, right? And you notice as I'm hovering over this, that things on the page over here are being highlighted. And that's giving me some more information about each of these elements. And so when I'm hovering over them, I can see some things. So for example, with this one, I can't move my cursor to show it to you, but if you look over the blue box there at the very top, there is a tooltip that's calling out that this is the header, and it's giving me the pixel dimensions of the header at this specific size. So I'm getting a little bit of information there. If I select the header, I get a lot more information. So down here, we're seeing something called the box model. The box model is just how CSS works. And the way that CSS works is that the area in blue is the size of the actual content. And then if it were to have padding, that padding would be highlighted in green, and we would be seeing how much the padding was. And then if there was a border, that would be highlighted in yellow, and it would show us about what the thickness of that was. And then the margin being highlighted in orange. So we can see that our header here doesn't have those things, but if you saw me scrolling here, my H3 does. You see my H3 has margins on the top and the bottom, and it also has its specific, the size of the content that we're seeing in the blue there. So this can really help you to find these invisible elements that might be changing the way that your site's displaying, and it lets you know some things that you need to remove from the CSS or override or add to be able to get your layout the way you want it to be. Now, below the box model here, in this computed tab, we can see some additional information, and this can be really useful too. You can see here with the H3 selected in the computed tab, not only do I see the box model, but I also see all of the properties that are being applied to H3s. And what's nice about this is I can expand these little chevron keys next to each thing, and I can see where that style is coming from. So there's multiple style sheets that are affecting this page already, even though we've just started. And I can see here that this is coming from what's called User Agent Style Sheet. What that means is Google Chrome's built-in styles. And so I'm seeing that it's being given this display of block from the User Agent Style Sheet. That's where the font size may be coming from as well. Yep, it's coming from both our style sheet, and this is cool because it tells me not only which style sheet, but what line. So line 28 of styles.css is applying that 16 pixel. We know that because we just did that. But we can also see that the user agent style sheet has styled H3s to be 1.17 EM, which is a little bit bigger than that 16 pixels. We'll talk about M and rem in just a little bit, but for now, let's keep going. We can see that there's a margin at the front, or at the start and the end. In this case, means top and bottom, right? And then margin inline start and end means left and right. So block top and bottom, inline right and left. And this is just one of the views that we can see. So the other view that I use a lot, and this is going to be sort of the end of the explanation, is the styles panel here. So computed tells me all the styles that are being affected on this element in order, right? But if I've applied a style and I don't see it being applied here, for example, the best place for me to look is going to be the styles panel. The styles panel gives me the same information, but it shows it to me in the order that it's being applied, from the most specific, and then as I scroll down, it gets more and more general. So I can see here that user agent style sheet is applying to H3s all of these styles. And I can see that in my styles.css at line 28, I have applied a font size of 16 pixels, but there's a line through it. That means it's being overridden by something above it. And in this case, I can see here it's this font size that's being applied. So if I were able to override this, I could change it. But for now, let's keep going. And let me let you know as well, if you have any errors in your CSS and you're scrolling in this view, you'll see styles like this that are, have this strike through element in the text, and you'll see a little icon of a yellow caution sign triangle that lets you know that that's not being applied. So that can be really helpful to find your errors as well. Okay, so the last thing you need to see before we start really working on this is the sources tab up here. Now I'm looking at my DOM right here, right, my HTML, and I can interact with this, by the way. I can click on this and I can change it. So I could change, for example, this H3. I could change it to an H4. I'm not actually changing it in my code. I'm changing it in the version of the code that the browser has downloaded. We talked about this in a previous video, where every web browser has its own, basically a downloads folder that is called the cache. And in order to speed up our experience when we're browsing the web, our browsers will download a lot of the resources and store them in that temporary downloads folder called the cache. And so I'm able to use that now to interact with this. And what I can do is I can test and play with this website without actually changing my code. And then if I find something that works, then I can go and update my real code. So the thing about designing in browser that you have to remember is the moment that you refresh the page, all of the changes that you're making in the developer tools will go away. So you can see I just made this an H4 from an H3. If I forget and I refresh the page, then that's going to be back to an H3 again. And so keep that in mind. So it is a temporary way to mess with pages, but you can actually look around and you can experiment with the code on any web page by using these. So you can learn a lot about how to write code by doing that. But the next tab that I want is the Sources tab. I'm going to come to the Sources tab and I'm going to choose styles.css as my style sheet. And now I can actually start writing my CSS right here and affecting my page. And when I get to the point that I want to keep something, I just need to remember to right click, save as, and then navigate to my 188 folder and my CSS folder and just overwrite styles.css here as I go to save my changes. So this video has gotten a little bit long in the process of me explaining the developer tools. So I'm going to start another video where we continue working on our navigation bars, but hopefully this gives you enough context to be able to use the developer tools to where you can design in browser along with me.